I never thought a quiet evening at my lakeside cabin would spiral into a battle of power, literally. But when the HOA, led by none other than Karen herself, slapped me with a $10,000 fine for my porch lights, I knew it wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control. And if they wanted to play with power, I'd show them just how much of it I really had. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. I can still see that night in my mind, like a picture burned into memory. The lake was quiet, the surface smooth as glass, and the sound of crickets filled the warm summer air. My cabin, sitting at the far end of the cul-de-sac, was my sanctuary. I built it with my own 2 hands, oak beams I hauled from a mill, cedar siding that still carried the smell of fresh wood, and a broad front porch that looked out over the water. For years, this place had been my retreat after long days as a power grid engineer. When I retired, I thought I'd finally left stress and control freaks behind. I was wrong. That night, I had 2 of my oldest friends over, Earl and Don, men I'd known since high school. We grilled thick ribeye steaks out back, with the smell of hickory smoke mixing with the breeze off the water. Earl leaned back in his chair, raising a cold beer. "Jim," he said, "this place is like heaven. I hope nobody ever messes with it." I chuckled and clinked bottles with him. Who would dare? We're half a mile from town. It's just us and the lake. Later, as the sun dropped behind the trees, I flipped on the string of warm cabin lights I'd installed along the porch beams. They weren't bright, just a gentle golden glow enough to see by, enough to make the night feel welcoming. We sat there for hours, laughing, telling old stories, and watching the fireflies dance in the yard. That porch light had always been a part of my evenings, a small reminder of comfort and safety. I never thought something so simple could cause a war. The next morning, I stepped out with my first cup of coffee, planning to enjoy the early mist rising off the lake. That's when I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel drive. A white SUV rolled to a stop like it owned the place. The driver's door swung open, and out came a woman I'd seen around the neighborhood but never talked to. She had sharp features and wore oversized sunglasses, even though the sun was barely up. She didn't smile, didn't say good morning. Instead, she strutted up my porch steps like she was marching into a courtroom. "Mr. James Carter?" she asked. I nodded. "That's me. Can I help you?" She handed me a bright yellow envelope and said, "You violated HOA Policy 5.3, improper exterior lighting. You're being fined $10,000. I stared at her, certain I misheard. 10,000 for porch lights. That's insane. Her tone was sharp, almost gleeful. Your lighting disturbs the natural night environment. The HOA takes this very seriously. You have 10 days to pay, or we escalate it to legal action." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Lady, my cabin sits 200 yards from the nearest house. Who exactly am I disturbing?" "The raccoons." Her lips tightened, and she tilted her chin up. "Rules are rules. I'm the HOA president, and I don't make exceptions, especially not for someone who thinks he's above the law." Above the law. Those words hit me harder than they should have. I'd spent my entire life keeping the power running for hundreds of homes during storms, ice, and blackouts. I knew the law, and I knew when someone was twisting it just to flex control. "Show me where in your rules it says porch lights aren't allowed." I told her, because I read that packet when I moved in, and I didn't see anything like this. She gave me a smile that made my blood boil. "Maybe you didn't read carefully enough. I'll give you one day to fix it. We'll be conducting a night inspection tomorrow. If your lights are still on, the fine doubles." With that, she turned and walked back to her SUV, leaving a cloud of dust and arrogance in her wake. I stood on the porch with the envelope in my hand, trying to calm my breathing. $10,000. She thought I'd just roll over and pay it? Not a chance. I went inside, dropped my coffee on the table, and pulled out the HOA rulebook. Page after page of nonsense. No peeling paint. No sheds without approval. No lawn over 3 inches. Nowhere did it say a single thing about porch lights. I was right. This wasn't about rules. This was personal. That night, I made a decision. I sat on the porch again. the same warm glow shining against the dark trees, and stared out over the lake. I wasn't about to let some self-proclaimed queen of the HOA push me around. If Karen, as I would later learn her name, wanted a fight, she'd just picked one with the wrong man. The very next day, I decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting. I usually stayed out of these gatherings. I'd bought my cabin to avoid drama, not to get tangled up in neighborhood politics. But after that outrageous fine, I needed answers. The meeting was held in the community hall, an old converted boathouse with a leaky roof and mismatched folding chairs. As I stepped inside, I could feel eyes turning toward me, like I'd just walked into enemy territory. At the head of the room sat the woman from the white SUV Karen. Now that I was seeing her in a formal setting, I realized just how much she enjoyed being in charge. She had a crisp white blouse tucked into a navy skirt, and a binder so thick it could double as a weapon. Her posture screamed authority, or at least her version of it. "Well," she said loudly, tapping a pen on the table, "look who decided to join us. Mr. Carter, we have a lot to discuss about your violations." "Violations," I said, pulling out the HOA manual I'd highlighted the night before. "Karen, I've read your rulebook twice now. Nowhere does it say porch lights are illegal." "Not once." The room fell quiet. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen narrowed her eyes. "You're disturbing the natural night environment, which falls under light pollution. Section 5.3 clearly states any non-approved exterior lighting is subject to fines. We set the fine amount, and you pay. Simple as that." "Simple," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You think slapping a $10,000 fine on someone for having a string of porch lights is simple? Show me where it says that amount is even legal." A man sitting near the back spoke up. "Karen, that fine does seem a bit steep." Karen shot him a look so sharp it could cut steel. "We don't need outsiders questioning how the HOA operates. Carl, outsiders," I repeated. "I live here, same as you all. I pay dues, keep my property neat, and don't bother a soul. Yet I'm being treated like a criminal because I want a little light on my porch." One woman near the window murmured, "He's got a point." Karen's face flushed red. She slammed her binder shut and leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, if you don't pay this fine, I will see to it that your property is flagged for additional violations. We'll have you buried in fees and legal notices before the month is over. Trust me, I've done it before." Something about the smugness in her tone told me she wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just about me. She'd made a habit of bullying people with fines, and most of them probably paid just to avoid trouble. I glanced around the room. A few neighbors avoided my gaze. Their shoulders slumped. I realized then that Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was running this HOA like her personal kingdom. "Karen," I said, stepping closer to the table, "you've picked the wrong man to push around. I don't scare easy, and I sure as hell don't hand over $10,000 without a fight. You want a war over porch lights? You've got one." Her lips curved into a thin smile. "We'll see about that." The meeting wrapped up soon after, with Karen rattling off other neighborhood issues. Though it was clear her mind was still on me, I walked out with a fire in my gut. This woman needed to be stopped, not just for me, but for everyone living under her thumb. That evening, I took a slow drive around the neighborhood. I noticed that several houses had porch lights, some brighter than mine, yet none of them had envelopes on their doors. Why me? Was it because I was new or because she thought I'd be an easy target? When I got home, I found another notice taped to my door. It read, "Final warning, remove all exterior lights immediately or the fine doubles. HOA President Karen." I crumpled the note in my fist. Doubles. She really thought she could intimidate me. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I spent my career designing and maintaining power grids for half the state. If anyone understood control, it was me. And Karen had just handed me a reason to remind her what real power looked like. That night, I sat on my porch again, the lights glowing softly above me. I wasn't just thinking about my cabin anymore. I was thinking about all the neighbors who looked beaten down at that meeting, too scared to speak up. Maybe Karen needed to see that someone could push back and win. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smug face and that yellow envelope with the ridiculous fine. By dawn, I was already on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the mist roll off the lake. If Karen thought I'd just back down, she didn't know me. I spent my career designing complex power grids, troubleshooting systems that other engineers couldn't even begin to understand. My entire life had been about solving problems, and this one, I intended to solve with precision. The first step was digging deep into the HOA's rules. I set up my old drafting table in the living room and spread out every document I could find. There was the original HOA charter, the bylaws, the list of amendments, and all the fine print in between. I read each page like a lawyer preparing for trial. Most of it was harmless rules about keeping the grass under 3 inches, no abandoned vehicles, no satellite dishes bigger than 3 feet across. But when I hit section 5.3, the one Karen had thrown at me, I realized something. The language was vague, deliberately vague. It said, exterior lighting must not be disruptive to the neighborhood or natural environment. Violations are subject to fines determined by the board. Determined by the board meant that Karen could pretty much pick any number she wanted. $10,000. Why not? It wasn't a rule, it was a weapon, and she wielded it like a sword. I started making notes, highlighting the inconsistencies and circling every line that could be challenged. If Karen wanted to play by the book, I'd know that book better than she did. Later that afternoon, I walked over to Carl's house. Carl was the man who had spoken up at the meeting, the one Karen had shut down with a glare. He lived 2 streets over, in a modest ranch-style home with a well-kept yard. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see me. "Jim, right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, shaking his hand. "Mind if I talk to you for a minute?" "It's about Karen." He sighed and stepped aside. "Come in. You're not the first one to butt heads with her." We sat at his kitchen table, and Carl poured me a cup of coffee. He told me stories, plenty of them. How Karen fined a young couple $2,000 for having a garden shed she didn't approve of. How she tried to ban kids from riding bikes on the cul-de-sac because it scuffed the pavement. Most of the neighbors just paid up or stayed quiet, afraid she'd make things worse. She's been running this HOA like a dictator for years. Carl said, anyone who crosses her gets buried in fees or legal threats. You're not the first, but you might be the first who's not afraid to fight back. You bet I'm not. I said, but I can't take her down alone. If I prove she's abusing the rules, will you stand with me? Carl smiled. You get the evidence. I'll be there. And I know a few others who might too. That night, I made it my mission to gather proof. I took a slow walk through the neighborhood, notebook in hand, jotting down every house with porch lights, landscape lighting, or decorative lamps. There were at least a dozen. Some of them were brighter than mine. Why hadn't Karen found them? The answer came the next morning when I knocked on Mrs. Thompson's door. She was a sweet older lady, probably in her late 70s, and her front porch had 2 bright lanterns that stayed on all night. "Mrs. Thompson," I said gently, "has Karen ever mentioned your lights?" The old woman laughed bitterly. "Oh, honey, I pay her off. Not in cash, but I bake her pies, bring her flowers from my garden, that sort of thing. Otherwise, she'd be after me too." It all started to make sense. Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was using them to control and manipulate whoever she wanted. By the end of the week, I had a list of 10 neighbors who either paid Karen, appeased her, or lived in fear of her fines. I also had pages of notes showing how inconsistent her enforcement was. I typed it all up into a report and made copies. That Friday, I dropped by Carl's place again. "This is it," I told him, handing over the stack of papers. "I'm calling a neighborhood meeting. If Karen wants to play by the rules, let's see how she handles the truth when everyone's watching." Carl grinned like a man who'd been waiting years for someone to say those words. Count me in. It's about time someone stood up to her. That night, as I sat on my porch, the lights glowing just as they always had, I felt a shift. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the whole community. Karen had ruled through fear long enough. It was time someone pushed back. The more I studied Karen's methods, the more I realized she wasn't just a petty tyrant, she was strategic. She picked easy targets, bullied them into submission, and made examples out of anyone who questioned her. If I was going to bring her down, I needed more than anger and evidence. I needed a plan. For 3 days straight, I worked like I was back in the control room of the power plant. I built a timeline of Karen's fines, cross-checked them with HOA bylaws, and created a folder thick enough to make any lawyer raise an eyebrow. But I knew paperwork alone wouldn't scare her. Karen didn't fear rules, she bent them. What she feared was losing control. And that's where my expertise came in. See, before I retired, I spent 30 years as a power grid engineer. I knew every inch of the local electrical infrastructure because I helped design most of it. Our neighborhood's entire grid fed through one substation. And that substation, it had a backup line running right under the old utility shed on my property. I hadn't touched that line in years, but I knew how it worked. If Karen wanted to play with power, I could show her what it really meant. I didn't plan to hurt anyone or cause damage. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. But if I could cut off the HOA's lights at the right moment, it would get everyone's attention. And it would show Karen that she wasn't the queen of this kingdom she pretended to rule. The first step was rallying support quietly. I invited Carl and a couple of neighbors over for coffee one evening. "Look," I said, laying out my folder of evidence. "Karen's been abusing the rules for years. I've got proof, and I've got a plan to make sure she can't ignore it anymore." "What kind of plan?" one neighbor asked nervously. "Nothing illegal," I assured him, though I couldn't hide the grin on my face. "But let's just say, if she thinks she can find me for porch lights, I might just show her what life looks like with no lights at all." Carl laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "Jim, you're not talking about I'm not going to do anything dangerous." I cut in. "But I can shut off power to the HOA clubhouse during their next big event. No lights, no microphones, nothing. We'll have the whole neighborhood there, and I'll lay out the truth about her." By the time we finished talking, I had 5 neighbors ready to stand with me. Some of them had been burned by Karen's rules. Others just wanted to see her knock down a peg. Over the next week, I prepared. I inspected the old utility panel behind my cabin, testing the lines and making sure I could safely switch the HOA grid off without affecting the town's main system. It was simple enough, just a matter of pulling a couple of breakers and rerouting power. Meanwhile, Karen seemed to sense I wasn't backing down. Every other day, I'd get another letter taped to my door, each one nastier than the last. "Failure to pay will result in legal action." One read, "Another threatened to involve county authorities if I didn't comply." Instead of scaring me, her letters fueled my determination. One morning, I saw her standing across the street, arms crossed, watching my cabin like a hawk. I walked right up to her. "Enjoying the view?" I asked. "You've got 3 days, Carter," she said. "After that, I'll make sure you regret ever moving here." "Funny," I replied, "because in 3 days, I think it's you who'll regret picking this fight." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't say a word. She just got into her SUV and sped off, dust flying in her wake. That night, I went over my plan one last time. The HOA was hosting its monthly summer social at the clubhouse, a big deal with catered food, music, and speeches. Karen loved these events. It was her stage, her chance to flaunt power. I planned to let her start her speech, and then plunge the entire place into darkness. Would it be dramatic? Absolutely. But sometimes you need a little drama to wake people up. On the morning of the event, I walked down to the substation panel and checked every switch. I could shut off their lights in less than 10 seconds and restore them just as quickly. I even tested my backup generator at the cabin to make sure I'd have my own lights if needed. By the time the sun began to set, I felt a strange calm. The lake was still, the sky streaked with orange and pink. I sat on my porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the clubhouse lights flicker on in the distance. Karen was over there now, no doubt rehearsing her speech. I smiled to myself. The stage was set. By the time the summer social rolled around, Karen was on a full-blown power trip. I'd seen her kind before people who mistake fear for respect. The closer we got to the event, the more desperate she became to intimidate me. 2 days before the party, I got a certified letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, stuffed with papers full of legal-sounding threats. Karen had apparently escalated my so-called violation and to the HOA's attorney, claiming I owed not just the original $10,000 fine, but also administrative fees that brought the total up to $12,500. She even included pictures of my porch lights as if I was running a Vegas casino instead of a few warm bulbs on a lakeside cabin. I sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the pages, shaking my head. She was overplaying her hand. That's what bullies do when they feel their grip slipping. They push harder. The next morning, I caught her prowling around my property again, standing at the edge of my driveway with a clipboard. I walked right out to meet her. "Karen," I said, calm but firm. "You're trespassing." She smirked. "I'm performing an inspection. As HOA president, I have every right to be here. Not without my permission." I shot back. "Step 1 foot past that mailbox, and I'll call the sheriff. I'm done playing your games." She stared at me for a long moment, her jaw tight. "You think you're clever, don't you, Carter? You think because you've got some friends whispering behind my back, you can undermine me." I smiled, just slightly. "I don't think I can. I know I will." She didn't like that. Her face flushed red, and she stormed off, muttering something about learning my place. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew she was planning to make the summer social her big stage to embarrass me. Later that day, Carl stopped by. "Jim, I heard Karen's been calling people, trying to dig up dirt on you. She's telling folks you're dangerous and that you threatened her." I sighed. That sounds like her. The more cornered she feels, the nastier she gets. But that's fine. Let her talk. Once we expose her at the meeting, no one will believe a word she says. Carl grinned. "So, the plan's still on." "Absolutely." I said, "If she wants to shine a spotlight on me, I'll just cut the power to her little show." The day of the summer social arrived hot and humid. By mid-afternoon, I could hear music drifting from the clubhouse soft jazz, the kind of stuff Karen probably thought made her look sophisticated. Rows of cars lined the street, and I saw neighbors carrying covered dishes, their faces polite but wary. Karen was good at pretending these events were for the community, but everyone knew it was her way of reminding them who was in charge. I dressed simply jeans, boots, and a clean flannel shirt, and walked over just as the sun started to set. The clubhouse looked like something out of a bad reality show, with string lights, banners, and a little podium set up for Karen's big speech. When she spotted me, her eyes narrowed. Well, she said, striding over like a sheriff in an old western. "I didn't think you'd have the nerve to show up." I smiled politely. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." She leaned in, her voice low but venomous. "If you think you can embarrass me, you're in for a surprise. I've got a stack of violation notices ready for you. The second this event ends, you'll have them on your door." "Funny," I said, tilting my head, "because I've got a surprise for you, too." She blinked, clearly not expecting that. Before she could press further, the HOA treasurer called her to the podium. She straightened up, plastered on a fake smile, and grabbed the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying through the speakers. "I'm so glad you could all join us tonight. Before we begin our dinner, I want to talk about the importance of rules and how we all must do our part to keep our community beautiful and compliant." I stood near the back, waiting. My fingers itched, knowing I could end her speech with a single flip of a switch. But I wanted her to dig her own hole first. She went on. "Some residents think the rules don't apply to them. Some people believe they can disrespect the HOA and, by extension, all of you. But I promise you, those people will face consequences, serious consequences." The crowd shifted uneasily. Even in her public speeches, Karen's tone was more threatening than inspiring. That was my moment. I stepped outside quietly, walked around the clubhouse to the hidden utility panel, and rested my hand on the breaker. "Let's see how you like the dark," I muttered, and with one firm motion, I flipped the switch. Instantly, the clubhouse went black, the music cut out, the string lights went dark, and a wave of gasps rose from the crowd. I could hear Karen's voice shrill, panicked shouting. "What happened?" I smiled to myself. Round one had just begun. The moment the lights went out, a hush fell over the crowd, followed by confused murmurs. I stood just outside the clubhouse, leaning against the wall, listening to the chaos unfold. People fumbled with their phones, using flashlights to see. Kids started crying. Someone tripped over a table, and I heard the crash of plates and glasses shattering. Then, over the noise, I heard Karen's unmistakable voice, shrill and commanding. "Stay calm. Everyone, I'll figure this out. Someone call the electric company?" I grinned. The electric company had nothing to do with this blackout. I knew the grid here better than anyone because I helped design it. I let her stew for a minute longer before stepping back inside, feigning confusion like everyone else. "What's going on?" I asked, looking around as if I hadn't just killed the lights with my own hand. Karen spotted me, her face red and glistening in the glow of cell phone flashlights. "You!" she hissed, stomping toward me. "This is your doing, isn't it? You sabotaged this event." I shrugged, keeping my tone calm. "How could I? I was standing right here like everyone else. Maybe your precious HOA should have invested in better wiring." The crowd erupted in whispers. A few people even chuckled. For the first time, I saw Karen's armor crack. She looked less like a queen and more like someone caught without a plan. "Don't you dare mock me," she spat. "You'll pay for this, Carter. I swear it." I crossed my arms. "Funny. You're quick to hand out fines, but when the lights go out, you've got nothing but threats. Maybe people are starting to see what you really are." A voice from the crowd called out, "Yeah, Karen, why's everything always about fines and threats? We're tired of it." Karen whipped around, her sunglasses, yes, she still wore them at night, slipping down her nose. "Who said that she demanded?" Carl stepped forward, his voice steady. "I did. And I think a lot of us are done putting up with your nonsense." The room murmured with agreement. A couple of neighbors nodded and spoke up about the outrageous fines they'd been slapped with over the years. Karen tried to shout them down, but without her microphone, she was just another voice in the dark. I let the moment build before I made my move. "You all want the lights back on," I said, raising my voice. "Then maybe it's time we start shining a light on what's really going on here. I've got proof right here in my hands of how Karen's been twisting HOA rules for her own gain." I pulled out the folder I'd prepared, thick with photos, notes, and copies of the HOA bylaws. I held it up for everyone to see. While she's been fining me for porch lights, half the neighborhood has the same setup: no fines, no warnings. You know why. Because Karen decides who gets punished and who doesn't. It's not about rules, it's about control. People started murmuring again, but this time it was angrier, directed at Karen. Someone shouted, "I got fined for a garden shed last year. She made me tear it down." Another voice added, "She threatened to sue us over a kid's swing set." Karen's face went pale under the dim light of a few cell phones. "Lies," she shouted. "He's just bitter because he broke the rules. Show us the rulebook." Karen Carl called. "Show us where it says we can't have porch lights." Karen hesitated. For once, she didn't have an answer. That was my cue. I stepped outside and flipped the breaker back on. The lights blazed to life, blinding everyone for a second. When their eyes adjusted, all they saw was Karen standing at the front of the room, red-faced and speechless. "Now that we can all see clearly," I said, walking to the front, "maybe it's time we decide if this is the kind of leadership we want. Because I don't know about you, but I'm tired of being bullied in my own neighborhood." A wave of voices rose up in agreement. Carl stepped beside me, and soon a half-dozen other neighbors joined us at the front. The momentum was shifting fast. Karen tried to regain control, slamming her binder shut and shouting, "This is my meeting. I am the HOA president, and I will not tolerate this insubordination. Not anymore," Carl said firmly. "We're calling an emergency vote. Right here. Right now." The room erupted into cheers. Karen looked around, realizing she was outnumbered. Her reign of fear was crumbling before her eyes. After the meeting, I walked back to my cabin with Carl. The porch lights glowed warmly as I poured us both a drink. "You sure know how to make an entrance," Carl laughed. "Sometimes you have to flip a switch to wake people up," I said, smiling. I knew the fight wasn't over yet. Karen wouldn't go down without trying something drastic. But the tide had turned. For the first time, the neighborhood was standing together, and Karen was standing alone. The night after the summer social, word spread faster than wildfire. By morning, everyone in the neighborhood had heard about the blackout and the confrontation at the clubhouse. Karen's reputation, which had once been ironclad, was now crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. I woke up early, poured myself a strong cup of black coffee, and stepped out onto my porch. The air was cooler than usual, but the atmosphere in the neighborhood was warm. Neighbors waved to me. Some even walked over to say thank you. I'd gone from the guy with the porch lights to the man who stood up to the HOA tyrant. Carl called around 9 a.m. "Jim, you're not going to believe this," he said, almost laughing. "Half the neighborhood is demanding an emergency meeting to vote Karen out. People are finally done being scared of her." "Good," I replied. "But we're not just voting her out. We're going to make sure this HOA is run the right way from now on." That evening, we gathered at the community hall again. The turnout was double what it had been for the summer social. Folks who hadn't attended a meeting in years showed up, some bringing copies of past fines and warning letters Karen had sent them. The tension was thick, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was anger mixed with determination. Karen strutted in at the last minute, her usual oversized sunglasses perched on her nose like a mask. She slammed her binder down on the table and tried to start the meeting with her usual sharp tone. "We have a lot of business to cover tonight. First order of business," Carl interrupted, standing tall, "is whether you should remain HOA president at all." The room erupted in cheers and clapping. Karen's face turned beet red. "You can't just yes. We can," I said, stepping forward with my folder of evidence. According to Section 1.8 of the HOA bylaws, members can call for a vote of no confidence if the board president is found abusing authority. And Karen, we've got proof that's exactly what you've been doing. I spread the copies of my notes and photos on the table for everyone to see. Here's a list of 10 houses with porch or landscape lights, no fines. Here's Mrs. Thompson, who was told her front door color wasn't compliant until she baked you pies. Here's Carl's record of threats over his garden shed. It's all here. Karen, this isn't leadership. This is harassment. A chorus of voices rose behind me. People stood up, one by one, telling their stories how Karen had fined them for minor things, threatened lawsuits, or humiliated them in meetings. The more they spoke, the quieter Karen became. Finally, Mrs. Thompson, who rarely raised her voice, stood up. "Karen, I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. I used to think you were keeping the place nice, but now I see you've been ruling with fear. I'm voting you out." The room erupted into applause. Karen's hands trembled as she tried to speak. "You can't just remove me. I've dedicated years to yes. We can," I said firmly. "Let's vote." Carl called for a show of hands. Out of nearly 40 people in the room, only 2 hands stayed down Karen's and the treasurer, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The rest shot up without hesitation. "It's settled," Carl said. "Karen, you're removed as HOA president effective immediately." The room cheered louder than I'd ever heard it before. Karen stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, in a huff, she grabbed her binder and stormed out, muttering threats under her breath. After she left, we didn't waste time. We formed a temporary committee to handle HOA duties until a proper election could be held. For the first time in years, people felt like they had a voice. "Jim," Carl said, shaking my hand, "if it weren't for you, we'd all still be living under her thumb." "I just flipped a switch," I replied, "but all of you were the real power here. You just needed a push." Neighbors laughed and nodded. Someone even suggested I run for HOA president, but I waved it off. "I'm no politician," I said. "I just want to enjoy my porch lights in peace." Later that night, I sat on the porch with the warm glow of the lights shining above me. The lake reflected the moonlight, calm and steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly relaxed. I knew Karen wouldn't give up quietly. People like her rarely did. But she no longer had the HOA as her weapon, and with the entire neighborhood united, there wasn't much she could do. The night Karen lost her throne, I slept better than I had in months. When I woke the next morning, the lake was calm. The sun was just breaking over the horizon, and for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt quiet, peaceful. No one was glaring from across the street. No nasty letters taped to my door. No threats hanging over my head like storm clouds. I walked out onto my porch, coffee in hand, and let my gaze linger on the string of warm lights above me. They weren't just porch lights anymore. They were a symbol, a sign that I'd stood my ground when someone tried to strip away the simple freedoms that make a house feel like home. As I sat there, Carl strolled over with a grin. "Morning, Jim. Thought I'd check in before heading to work." "You hear the latest?" I raised an eyebrow. "What's Karen up to now?" He chuckled. "Oh, she's gone full meltdown. She sent a mass email at 3 in the morning calling last night's vote illegal and threatening to sue the HOA. But guess what? Half the neighborhood already signed a petition supporting the new committee. She's got no ground to stand on." I smiled, sipping my coffee. "Good. Let her scream into the void. She's not scaring anyone anymore." Carl laughed. "You know, you could run for HOA president. People would vote for you in a heartbeat." I shook my head. "Nah, I didn't do this to take over. I just wanted fairness. If we can get someone in who cares about the community instead of power, that's all I need." Over the next few weeks, things changed in ways I hadn't expected. Neighbors who barely spoke to one another started stopping by to chat. People shared stories about the ridiculous fines Karen had given them and laughed instead of fuming. A couple of families even organized a neighborhood barbecue, something no one had dared to do while Karen was in charge. When I showed up at the barbecue with a tray of smoked ribs, I was greeted like an old friend. Kids ran around with sparklers. Adults leaned back in lawn chairs. And for the first time, I saw this neighborhood for what it could be, a real community. Mrs. Thompson came over, her hands dusted with flour from the pies she'd brought. "Jim," she said warmly, "you did something no one else had the guts to do." "Thank you." I smiled. "I didn't do it alone. We all stood up together. That's the only reason it worked." She patted my arm. "Still, someone had to take the first step. You lit the way, literally." A few days later, I found myself standing in front of the HOA clubhouse again, this time helping the new committee fix some of the mess Karen had left behind. We discovered she'd been overcharging residents for years and pocketing administrative fees that weren't in the budget. The new treasurer, a retired accountant, was already digging through the numbers to set things right. When the meeting ended, I lingered behind for a moment, looking around the quiet building. It felt different now. No tension, no fear, just a group of neighbors trying to take care of their own. As I walked home, the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lake. I reached my porch just as the first fireflies blinked to life in the yard. I flipped on the lights, sat back in my chair, and let out a long breath. I've spent most of my life fixing things wires, circuits, power grids, but this fight wasn't about fixing a system. It was about standing up when someone tried to push me and everyone else around. It taught me that silence only gives bullies more room to grow. Karen wanted control. What she got was a reminder that real power doesn't come from rules or titles. It comes from people standing together. As I watched the lights flicker across the porch, I raised my glass of sweet tea to the quiet night. "To freedom," I muttered, smiling. And if you're watching this story right now, maybe you've got your own Karen to deal with a person or a problem trying to push you around. My advice: stand your ground, push back, and never let anyone dim your light. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own HOA tales in the comments. Who knows, your story might be the next one we tell. Looking back on it all, I realized this battle was never just about porch lights or HOA rules. It was about principle, about standing up when someone tries to take away the simple joys and freedoms that make life worth living. Karen thought she could break me with fines, threats, and fear, but all she did was remind me why you never let a bully win. The day the neighborhood came together, something powerful shifted. We weren't just fighting against Karen, we were standing up for each other, and that's what community is supposed to be. I can still see the glow of my porch lights that night, steady and warm against the dark. They weren't just lights anymore. They were proof that no one, not even an HOA tyrant, could take away our right to live free on our own land. So, if you've got your own HOA Karen trying to control your life, remember this: you're stronger than you think. And when you stand your ground, you just might inspire others to do the same. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too, and who knows, yours might be the next tale we bring to life.